Hello, everyone. I slowly see people joining, so we'll give people about 3 minutes to fully fill out our online audience.
Fine.
Very excited to have you all here. Very excited and very honored to have Tina here. And I can already see so many people joining. Thank you so much, people, and I really appreciate it. Okay. Let's give it 20 more seconds for the number to stabilize. I see people already putting their hand up. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and then you can find the Q&A box in the chat or at the lower section of your Zoom panel, and we will be more than happy to ask these questions to Tina after the webinar. Tina, would you prefer to be for the questions to be asked in the real time or after?
I think it's probably best afterwards, and then there may be some questions that are grouped in themes, but shall I rely on you to ask the questions or yeah. Okay.
Lovely. I will be monitoring this chat with Dalila. Okay, I think the number is stabilized, so I think we can officially begin. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. My name is Dominika Wilczok. I am the coordinator at the Longevity Education Hub. With me is the course manager, Dalila Čamdžić, and our wonderful keynote guest speaker, Tina Woods. Tina, thank you so much for joining. This is a huge honor, especially at the busy time in your life right now after the publication of this Nature Medicine paper about cities, communities, and clinics as test beds for human exposome and aging research. I know you're getting a lot of very well-deserved attention for this. Thank you so much for finding the time to join us. And as part of the introduction, I would like to start a little bit of a personal note. And I'm not sure if you would remember this, Tina, but we met for the first time in person in Shanghai in the International Conference for Aging and Disease.
That's right.
You were the first big name person in longevity that I ever met. And I remember the night before the conference, I was going through the conference booklet and just circling your name with the big red marker, being like, yes, I need to talk to her. And I was so impressed with your bio.
I remember speaking.
Right, this was so thank you so much for like welcoming me unawarely to this longevity world, because that's certainly shaped my attitudes and my path. So you played a big role in my longevity career. I really appreciate that.
I'm honored.
And on a more professional note, for all our audience here, Tina is a social entrepreneur and systems architect, the founder and CEO of Collider Health and Business for Health. In the UK National Innovation Centre for Aging, she's the Healthy Longevity Champion. She sits on multiple advisory boards in all the health, sustainability, longevity groups. And on a even more fun note, she's also the founder and main propagator of longevity raves, which I hope to hear a little bit more about, and I hope certainly to attend one day. And she's just the real pioneer of introducing longevity and thinking about health as not just a stable object in time, but rather on a spectrum into actual lives and systems rather than just in the labs and clinics. So you're a true pioneer, Tina, in this field. I am very honored to be observing your work in real time. And without further ado, I am giving my floor to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for a very comprehensive introduction. And yes, I do run Longevity Rave, and you can get, and longevity happens on the dance floor. So now I DJ at my own longevity rave. So yes, it's a lot of fun. And it's a very good way of describing, I think, longevity in the new frontier, and of how we need to find, I think a lot of people are motivated by the joy of living. And I think I find a lot of joy from music and dancing. So there we go. But there may be some questions about that later on in the talk. But yes, so really, really honored to be here. And yes, I do very well remember being in Shanghai, as you referenced, and it was really great to be in China. Of course, there's a lot of things happening in China at the moment, in longevity as well. So I'm here really to talk about, and as you mentioned, the Nature Medicine paper was published recently, really looking at how cities, communities, and clinics are ideal test beds for human exposome and aging research. Now, I know a lot of the people on the call are very involved in the field of aging and longevity research. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the exposome and how this relates to this field. And I think even a couple of years ago, I was also speaking to this idea of the human exposome. So I think now we're finding it's now really starting to resonate in the scientific community. And I think back even at the Biomarkers of Aging Consortium event, I was speaking at Harvard in November, and that was very much the topic of my talk. So as was mentioned in terms of my sort of background, I mean, a lot of my passion and my enthusiasm, my work is very much around this concept of system change. And I work really with all sorts of different stakeholders. I work with government, policy, the business world, third sector. And I think more and more, I think really what is so important is to engaging real people, real citizens, real communities and citizens, you know, in this whole debate. Because in the end, we're talking about real people and how do we deliver the science and technology to make a real difference to people's lives. And I see the real opportunity in longevity really as sort of driving this shift that we need to be seeing in a lot of countries around the world, which are very focused on this sort of a sick care model of healthcare, you know, treating you when you're sick and need to be fixed when you're broken. And actually, I see the real opportunities of longevity science and technology really moving upstream into health prevention and really across the whole life course. And that of course involves, you know, right even before birth, you know, at conception. So as you mentioned, I work with a lot of different groups. I'm going to be focusing the first half of my presentation actually in some of the work that I've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years with the National Innovation Center for Aging in the context of their City of Longevity program. I'm going to finish the second half of my presentation a little bit on some of the more the current work that I've just started doing with my new role as the executive director of the International Institute of Longevity. So so my presentation is in 2 parts. So just a little bit more on the City of Longevity program. So this is a program which is really focused and it's a dynamic evidence-based open source framework and toolkit for system engagement in cities around the world to really look at what works to really help people in their communities to live healthier, longer lives. And you know, so far there are about 17 cities signed up to this program, including big cities like Beijing and Shanghai, for example, and also Buenos Aires, Bergamo, and of course places in the UK, for example, Newcastle, where the National Innovation Center for Aging is based. And I think a lot of the discussion that's been happening at the city level really starts to, this is really where the exposome conversation, I'll come on to what the exposome is in a second, but we're really looking at actually what will bring health to people in their communities. And with that, what will bring wealth, because of course, if you're in good health, you'll have a longer, healthier life. You'll tend to be more active, producers in your communities more active, and more productive. And I think this is a recipe and a formula that a lot of the longevity community is actually looking at, and actually was the focus of a lot of discussion at a recent event that I talked at the Hevolution HealthSpan Global Summit, and you know, in Riyadh in February, where they did speak a lot about how HealthSpan and longevity can actually fuel sort of wealth, you know, regionally, but also around the world. And we have some interesting statistics about that. So Professor Andrew Scott, some of you may know, he estimated that this is in the US situation, a 38 trillion economic value for each year of extra of healthy life in the USA. So that's a big economic upside. And actually, if you look at the cost of ill health, McKinsey did report had said the cost of poor health in the USA alone is on the order of about $2.3 trillion a year. And it's, of course, it's the most vulnerable communities that suffer most. So I think, so these are all really, really important sort of factors really to factor into, you know, longevity education and research and so forth, because it really is creating health that we need to focus on. So, so I'm going to be talking a little bit more about why we need from moving from the Human Genome Project to the Human Exposome Project, and speaking a little bit about the burning platform for this. So as I mentioned, we have an increasingly unsustainable model of healthcare, which is focused too late on treating disease, when really we need much better sort of prevention and population health improvement. And actually what we're finding is that the aging demographic shift that we're seeing in a lot of the world, combined with a chronic disease epidemic, which we really do have in many of the westernized countries, is actually creating an economic drag, you know, in many nations, and certainly in the UK where I'm based. the government are really, really focused at the moment on the workforce inactivity crisis, because we have such an ill population that we're starting to see people drop out of the labor market. And of course, that's actually affecting our economic growth prospects and indeed hitting the economy as we speak. So it is a really, really big issue. And now I studied genetics a very long time ago at university, and I finished my degree right before the Human Genome Project actually was initiated. Now, many of you will know this is a colossal sort of multi-stakeholder, multi-government exercise that went over many, many years to really look at, decoding the human DNA. And of course, there's a lot of hope and promise on that project initially when it first embarked, that it would, we'd find, every cure to disease known to man, it would unravel, all the sort of mysteries of human health and disease. But actually, more than anything, it showed that the genome genetics is only a relatively minor determinant of our health. And so we need a much better understanding of non-genetic factors. Now, some of you will have seen some recent research. This is before my paper was published along with 20 others last month in Nature Medicine by Austin Argentero and many other authors that really confirmed that the relatively minor role that genetics plays in our health. And it's really the exposome, which effectively represents the totality of exposures that individuals experience over their lifetime, how they affect their health. And actually, the exposome is responsible, and this is what the paper by Austin showed, the exposome is responsible for 10 times more variation in mortality risk than genetic predisposition. So that was all based on UK Biobank data, and that actually got quite a lot of attention right before our paper was published on that I'll come to now, and you'll see a little bit of that on your slide. So this paper came out right after the other one, and actually what it showed is that this is the real rationale for why we need, after the Human Genome Project, why we need the Human Exposome Project, and the time is now. And so I had 20 authors involved in that paper, and of course you will see it. The print may be a bit small on your screen, but of course people who you will know very, very well, people like Evelyn Bischoff, Andrea Mayer, Brian Kennedy, these are all probably names that are known to you. They are all involved in this particular paper. And really what we wanted to show is that, cities, clinics, communities, they're ideal test beds to actually look at understanding human health from the exposome perspective. And also aging research, because we need, and it will furnish the evidence that we need to design environments, positive environments that enhance healthy life expectancy while reducing health and well-being inequalities, which is a massive factor in driving down health. This paper was published about 2.5 years after we first set out the concept of the exposome for the City of Longevity program. And this was published in the Lancet Healthy Longevity title. And again, a lot of the authors that you see involved in the Nature Medicine piece were also involved in that. So you can see it's taken a while for the idea of the exposome to really kind of have its time. Now, and you'll see the exposome moonshot form on that slide. And so the paper coincided with the arrival of an international movement, which is effectively the international movement that we need to really drive the Human Exposome Project, a generation on from the Human Genome Project, to understand how external exposures, which link social, behavioral, and geophysical factors, and their interaction with internal factors such as genetics and physiology, how does that affect an individual's resilience and health span? So I was very, very delighted to be invited to sit on the steering committee for the Exposome Moonshot Forum, which is actually meeting for the first time in Washington, D.C. in May, from the 12th to the 15th of May, to really launch what will effectively become an unprecedented scientific endeavor to really make the Human Exposome Project happen. And so what we'll be looking at in May is the roadmap to be able to achieve this, the key areas of research, how we mobilize technology and AI, for example, how public and private partnerships will work, and the required framework and governance structure to really make it all happen. So this work will be crucial in defining new ways to address the chronic disease epidemic that is really running rife in so many nations around the world, compounded by the aging demographic crisis, which is creating the economic drag that I mentioned earlier, and will shape more effective public health interactions and interventions that we really need and are needed to shift this sort of unsustainable healthcare model to a much more sustainable and long-term sort of prevention, health, and well-being model. and affect investment decisions, policy decisions, and so forth. And I think the other thing to really remind people of course, the exposome links planetary health too, because we know the root causes and the solutions of human health is very, very linked to planetary health. And there's, of course, corresponding to that is growing interest in technological advancements in the fields of exposome tracking, climate monitoring, omics technologies, etc. And just last week, I was actually involved in Miami at an event called Ocean Burn, which was an event really geared to raise awareness about the problems that we're currently facing with plastics literally clogging up the world's oceans. We've got plastic islands that are now 3 times the size of France that are literally circulating around the world. And many of you will know that microplastics, for example, is really starting to get a lot of attention in terms of really impacting human health now. And it's now entering all human tissues. You may have read about, it's in the brain. It might have, huge implications with dementia, progression, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a massive impact. So I think these are all really show the links between planetary health. And of course, even at COP, the COP28, for example, health was for the first time actually on the agenda for the climate change movement. So it is really, really starting to.
Hi, Tina, I'm sorry to interrupt for a second. We are still on the title slide. So
Sorry.
No,
See,
no,
on
no.
my
I am
screen.
sorry.
So for some
Sorry for the
reason,
technical
how
issues.
do you see it?
Still see the title slide,
That's very strange.
but I can see your cursor moving. Maybe you can just like scroll down or use the small arrows on the right side of the screen when it shows the 1/18 slides. On the right side bottom, there's
Oh,
this
here we go.
1/18.
Yeah. Okay, so let me
Okay.
just. Okay, so now I'm back to the title slide. Sorry. Do you see that
We
slide?
we still see the title slide.
That's very strange. Very strange. I'm just wondering whether I should bring back up the I've got something on PDF.
Maybe if that's not a problem, you could like reshare the screen.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Go back and share again.
And even though we always have a backup, we can show the slides externally.
You see the slides there?
Yeah, we do.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Sorry for interrupting.
You see the slides now?
Yes, it's full on changing.
So it's changing now.
Yes, it's changing now. Everything works.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. So you see the slide from Human Genome to Human Exposome Project.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Okay, so now it's for some reason it got stuck in the last sharing. Okay. So anyways, you can see the Nature Medicine article there. Human Genome to Human Exposome Project, the Exposome Moonshot Forum that I've just been describing. So I'll move on to the next slide. And you can see that, can you? Excellent. Okay. So essentially, there's a little, so this is really about describing really the exposome factors. So this particular slide that is really driving 80% of our health outcomes. So what we need to do is we need to understand which, the environmental factors encompass in the exposome in terms of helping humans not only to survive, but to have the resilience to adapt to stress and to thrive in their real world. So I often talk about health span, resilience, and flourishing in all my work. So we see that most health and well-being is actually determined by the exposome, and you'll see on that slide, and that's everything external to us and how we interact with it internally as well. Now, this is actually quite a complicated problem. It's very complex, but we now have the ability to actually look at this with the technologies and the frontier technologies that we have at our disposal. So on that slide, you'll see that 80% of our health outcomes are driven by exposures and that we all face in our lives, and even before birth. And based on the available evidence, largely from large-scale population studies, there are exposome. The ones that are on that slide on the left are the exposome factors that have the most significant impact on human health, roughly in order of priority. And relative impact on healthy life expectancies and health outcomes. So we have, for example, indoor and outdoor air quality is obviously very, very important. And actually, the more you delve into the research, you realize how significantly it is impacting human health. We know, obviously, that diet and nutrition is obviously really important. And we can see the huge problems that we have with the obesity epidemic in certain parts of the world, which is really, really driving down health. We have physical activity and lifestyle. So physical activity, I mean, we don't move enough. So movement and keeping active is a massive driver and exposomic factor. Psychosocial stress is actually hugely important and actually is a massive driver, and particularly now what we're worried about in younger populations. So in the UK, for example, 16 to 24-year-olds through mental health and stress are really, really starting to suffer and are actually dropping out of the labor market. So these are massive, massive factors. And of course, we also know about the loneliness epidemic in older populations. So these are really, really important. And not surprisingly, chemical exposures, occupational hazards. I talked a little bit about microplastics, for example, pollutants in the air. These are all, really important exposomic factors. So if you look at the impact of this, for example, with air pollution, the World Bank, for example, estimates that the global cost of air pollution, both ambient and in households, is approximately 8.1 trillion annually. And that's down to healthcare expenses and lost productivity. So it's really, really, really significant. And actually, I'm speaking to a lot of organizations that are really looking at how do we create, clean air environments in our homes and our office buildings, because it's where we spend the majority of our time. So these are actually really, really becoming significantly and very, very important. So just moving on to the next slide, and I hope you can see that. Now, even though we can see the huge impact of the exposome on human health and suffering, it remains largely unmeasured and unactionable at the personal level. So we have large-scale sort of population studies, but actually we need much more data at a granular level, what's really happening at the level of the individual. We also know that some people, and in the end, it's about individuals, it's about the N=1, some people are much more resilient than others when confronted with stress in their environment. And this could be psychosocial stress, it could be environmental threats. And the whole concept of resilience is getting a lot more attention and relates to understanding how humans adapt to adverse conditions and recover from them, and reflects other individual qualities like control, a sense of autonomy, optimism. Optimism gets talked a lot about. Peter Diamandis will say that, if you're more optimistic, you will have, an increased health span. So, and of course, we're starting to see that in documented research. But despite this, and despite the impact that we know about all these factors on health and resilience, it remains largely unmeasured and unactionable at a personal N=1 level. So, and we also know that specific environmental factors can activate pathological pathways that contribute to disease and accelerate aging. The ability to capture and analyze and link individual data outside the medical record can show how external exposures actually affect a person's health across their lifetime. And now these interactions can be much better understood at an individual level and traced with much better precision because, of course, we have artificial intelligence, for example. And this represents a huge leap forward in our understanding and determining the impact of the exposome at an individual level, but of course at an aggregated population health level as well. So I sit, so one of the groups I sit on is the Global Visioneering team for XPRIZE. And a few months ago, I was actually at their Global Visioneering workshop, and this is where I actually pitched the idea of the Human Exposome Project as a future moonshot for XPRIZE. And our concept at the time, and this is, an example of a private-public partnership that perhaps we could be looking at with the Exposome Moonshot Forum and meeting in Washington in May. Our concept for the XPRIZE was to develop a personal, portable, interoperable human exposome wallet for the army of people who want to donate their data to the Human Exposome Project as this open source, gigantic, sort of colossal international collaborative effort. But will also fuel the next generation products and services that we want to see around the world to really look at, the data that we need to understand what is happening at an individual level. So the idea was to harness the data from personal exposome data wallets to feed into this data portal for mass health research at scale. And of course, be able to produce the evidence that we also need to influence policy, to influence investment decisions at scale, to really start to look at disrupting the paradigm of healthcare that we have at the moment, and really sort of look at how do we create and spend more money and policy attention on creating these positive environments for human flourishing. It's the sort of stuff that, for example, groups like NEOM, the future city of in Saudi Arabia is looking at. How do we create an environment for people to to stay healthy and well for as long as possible. So it's really, really interesting, all the new thinking that is going into this space. So this comes into the next slide. So how can we actually look at cities, communities, and clinics really to offer sort of these test beds, for human exposome research? And how do we actually be able to generate the standards and the guidelines, from the laboratories, from the bench, to be tested in the real world with real people of different ethnicities, different ages, different groups around the world and living conditions? So we obviously have a huge explosion of healthy longevity clinics, for example, not only in the private setting, but also in the public sector. For example, Andrea Mayer, for example, in Singapore. And indeed, we have, longevity cities being trailblazed around the world. And this goes back to my City of Longevity initiative. And of course, we've got many, many groups around the world really trying to create health in their cities and to actually, provide these ecosystems, to actually look at how we can create these test beds, where we can see these decentralized trials. To track people's daily behavior as well as internal and external exposures. How can we link and share and analyze complex exposomic data, connecting secure data environments to data from personal data intermediaries, for example? I talked about data wallets, open source platforms. How do we actually understand the links between biological, social, psychological, and behavioral factors in aging and realign incentives and metrics to predictive prevention, for example? Because of course, and I'm sure many of the people on this call will have heard of this concept around biomarkers, a term that's used to define a characteristic that is measured as an indicator of normal biological processes, pathogenic processes, or responses to an exposure or to an intervention. And of course, biomarkers can be used to assess what interventions at a personal level can help us to keep healthy, and through insights and behavioral nudges, for example. We can extrapolate all this data in a secure and privacy-preserving way to understand population health and design system-wide solutions and behavioral nudges as well. So these are all the sorts of ideas that are being looked at in longevity clinics and longevity communities and longevity cities. And of course, will provide the sort of insights that we can create longevity as a service via open decentralized collaboration, for example. So, and we've got many, many apps that are out there already, and some of which I already use myself, like the Humanity app, for example. It's a really great app to measure and track biological age, but what it does, it captures fitness and other cardio data from our sort of, wearables like smartphones, etc. Sleep data from the Oura Ring, for example. But it also is starting to capture and measure sort of psychological markers. It asks you how you feel. What's your mood? Do you meditate? Are you spending time in nature? Are you socially connected? So these are all the sorts of things that is captured in this particular app, and where you can upload blood test results, etc., etc. So it's really looking at what really is effectively, exposomic data. So it's a great tool to incentivize and nudge people. And we also, and many of you will know on this call, there are groups, including the Biomarkers of Aging Consortium I mentioned in Harvard, but also the Aging Biomarker Consortium in China, where they're all working towards an international consensus on which aging biomarkers are actually the most useful to track and measure human health span and resilience. And of course, extending this work into the exposome, which of course they are starting to do, provides a really great opportunity to find those factors responsible for biological aging that can be monitored, longitudinally in real life, but also be categorized as internal versus external exposures. And then, of course, they can be classified and categorized in terms of moving beyond the individual to the micro level, the home, to the exo level, which is more social and building related, and also, of course, even at a higher sort of macro level towards the neighborhood or city level. So these are all the sorts of things that we're looking at in this new model of using cities, communities, and clinics as test beds. So I want to spend a little bit of time to look at where we are with some of the work at the cutting edge of clinics around the world. And of course, many of you will know there are clinics being launched in many big metropolitan areas around the world. And of course, there's a lot of investment going into wellness retreats and hotels, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a huge explosion of activity in this sense. And I just have taken on, as I mentioned before, a new role as the executive director of the International Institute of Longevity that will really look at how clinics can get involved in generating that evidence base for how best to develop interventions to maximize human health span, resilience, and flourishing. And we know that a lot of clinics at the moment, they're offering, very fancy kind of like this through the cutting edge sort of, sexy sort of tech and diagnostics, etc. But I think we still have to remember that there's still no drug or molecule or intervention that can outdo the negative effects of a poor diet, air pollution, low activity rates, poverty, stress, all these sorts of things that can automatically take years off your life. So I think we have to remember that, this really is at the hub of all the exposomic research that we need to carry out to really drill down what are the key areas of impact that we must focus on, both in the clinic setting, but also more widely in the sort of the communities and city level setting. So the mission of the Institute is, as it says on that slide, we really want to drive global excellence in longevity research and application through responsible medicine, adaptation of research into practical use, and of course the N=1 aspect of this is really important, and promotion of best practice to extend human health span, resilience, and flourishing. And I think, that our work comes at a very important time, I think, in the longevity industry, where there's clearly a growing consumer appetite for health and wellness, and obviously and corresponding investor interest in longevity biotech, and of course longevity as a service that I mentioned on our last slide. And of course longevity as a service is kind of like an umbrella term that really covers everything from wellness to health optimization, including sports performance and optimization, nutrition advice, supplementation, lifestyle counseling, mental health coaching, and of course moving into longevity therapeutics, etc. And of course, we see with that is an explosion in businesses and products that claim to offer this sort of longevity advice and product offerings. But of course, we have to remember that a lot of these have not quite yet acquired the necessary evidence base and the real rigor that we really need to be able to, convincingly say that this really will drive impact at an N=1 level, which is where it counts. And I think it's because of the complexities of us as individuals and how we all interact differently and respond differently to all the threats in our wider environment. That is really at the hub of what I call the next frontier of longevity. So just a little bit of background on what the International Institute is and what we are. So it was originally founded a few years ago, actually, by Joanna Bench, who is the founder of Longevity Center Europe, and they have clinics operating in Europe, and Eric Verdun, who of course is the head of the Buck Institute in the US, who many of you will have heard about as well. And really, it started out as a platform to bring together longevity clinics and industry providers, solutions providers, to support, the healthy longevity sector. And of course, it's that translational into hands-on application, that will really make a difference to real people. And so really our focus is about working with the clinics around the world and to provide also, professional sort of advice and practice for policymakers and industries that are connected to wellness. So we're right now currently involved in bringing together the most leading the cutting edge clinics, those who've been around for a while, who've got significant sort of patients on their books, to really be involved in pulling together industry standards and best practice, because that is what we need now. And of course, there are groups like HLMS, which of course Evelyn Bischoff is now president of, which are really cutting through on the need for standards in medical education and practice. And of course, many of you on this call will already be involved in that, because we really do need that, because we need standardization, we need protocols, guidelines, against which we can actually start to measure and benchmark clinics that are all setting up now. And of course, and by adhering to these gold standards and global best practice, we can get, groups, to be able to differentiate themselves from others in the marketplace, because I think consumers and of course, citizens and people making access of these services will really want to see, you know, what is value for money and what is, you know, really delivering value for their health. So these are all the sorts of things that we'll be looking at and working with those organizations like HLMS to provide, you know, the training and the accreditation that is really, really needed to enhance the skills base, you know, in the industry. So, of course, part of what we're doing is this think tank approach. And as part of that is actually incorporating a whole sort of research arm to support a network of collaborators to foster the innovations and the solutions to address both the business, but also the medical challenges. And we really, really do want to kind of seed, you know, decentralized trials, you know, working with the clinics from around the world to really and start to look at, you know, sharing data and insights and harnessing, you know, advanced technologies like AI, genomics, personalized medicine, etc. So we're now consulting our stakeholders and clinics around the world about what we could do together, what will be the added value of coming together at a time when we have this broken model of health that really does need to be disrupted, where we do need new business models, you know, how we actually reimburse, you know, the clinics, you know, what are some of the insurance models that we need, how are we actually going to pay for all of this to really incentivize prevention rather than leave it too late. So this is really where we want to see longevity sort of really moving into the mainstream so that it really starts to take over a much bigger part of the pie in terms of consumer health and wellness. So what we did a few months back before a pivotal event in December that was held by the Buck Institute and the International Institute for the second annual Longevity Clinics Roundtable is to actually, you know, ask clinics, well, really, what do we need? So this is what we presented, and I'll present you some of the key findings that we found from the clinics that we spoke to. What really could we deliver, and what are really the big opportunities and the gaps that we need to focus on in this endeavor to bring the clinics from around the world and to really look at this exposomic research. So clearly, I mean, a big factor in this sort of alliance that we're sort of bringing together is we do need to work together on the development of international industry standards and best practice for clinics who are performing longevity medicine. And of the sort of the key priority areas, patient and client care and safety protocols was ranked very, very highly. Because we have, and I know it, Evelyn and Andrea Mayer spoke in a recent article about even, for example, the dangers of oversubscribing supplements, for example, because many people attending clinics, they're given far too many supplements. There's a lack of evidence base behind them. And so these are some of the dangers that we're starting to see. So safety is really important, quality prescribing. Ethical principles and guidelines came up really, really highly. And I mentioned, you know, this sort of business model innovation. How are we actually going to incentivize and pay for prevention in a way that really isn't being done at the moment? And of course, you know, the development of technology standards. How do we create standardized data formats, for example, in clinical trials? These all came out very, very highly. And we also need, and what came up very, very highly, is internationally recognized policies and regulations to support the growth of longevity clinics. And of course, the big areas that came out, system change towards prevention. So I spoke a little bit about that. And again, business model innovation is really important. Government regulation, how do we encourage, you know, regulation to support data, you know, the harmonization of data standards? How do we support, you know, real research in anti-aging sort of therapeutics? How do we, you know, disrupt and work with the regulation authorities to educate and to be part of some of the work that they need to do to look at this differently? And of course, and this will not be a surprise, medical training and certification is so important and is very, very well addressed, of course, by groups like HLMS. But we're really finding the real problem and the challenge for so many of these clinics. They don't have the doctors, they don't have the clinicians, but also all the other allied health professionals with the required training. So this is a massive area of need, which absolutely must be a focus moving forward. And we also, not surprisingly, saw a huge appetite to work together in participating in collaborative research projects. And of course, and there's a need to learn far more in areas like, and these were the big research priorities. Now, biomarkers come up a lot. And of course, we have groups around the world looking at this, the Biomarkers of Aging Consortium. We need to actually have, you know, more further validation consensus. And of course, there's been a lot of work already. But I think in terms of Exposomic, we've got a lot more to do in this respect. How do you prioritize, biomarkers, that actually matter most to human health and flourishing at an N=1 level? The use of functional biomarkers, for example, keeps on coming up. How do we really use that understanding to develop a better personalized health and medicine protocols? And of course, how do we design and implement human trials and decentralized digital trials where we can really, really start to look at this much more closely as a community? So these came out really, really strongly. And of course, not surprisingly, pretty much overwhelmingly, we do see a huge need for internationally certified training programs for longevity practitioners. So clinicians, doctors, but also more widely in terms of the operations of clinics. So operational excellence in longevity clinics rank very, very highly. Personalized medicine approaches, advanced diagnostics, biomarker analysis. How do we integrate data, AI, and genomics into practice? These all came out really, really strongly. And some of the comments, that came out in some of the more sort of qualitative analysis, there was a huge need for anonymized data sharing to accelerate innovation. There's a little bit of, I guess, concerns to make sure it's done properly so that we protect people's privacy, etc. So comments like, as long as consent is obtained, anonymization is done correctly and data secure, they're all up for it. And of course, data sharing is a key pillar to validate diagnostic and therapeutic protocols, but we should find a cooperation model to benefit all the data givers, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all the sorts of things that came out in the research. And of course, what came out is how do we apply and integrate technology? And of course, we're speaking to a lot of really amazing sort of multi-omics data platforms that are out there that are really trying to harness all the data that we have. I mean, it's really cutting edge stuff, but we have to get to the clinics in a position where we can look at the standardization of data formats, et cetera, to be able to share data and to really be able to collaborate in this sort of research and to share trends and diagnostics and interventions. And how do we, and looking at the interoperability of data systems, promote those advanced data diagnostic tools and wearable technologies, and to encourage the development and the adoption of AI-driven predictive models. These are all the sorts of things that are really, really important and we must come together on. So these are really sort of points about the need for more collaboration, supportive on this whole business of data sharing. But I think just much more regular, and we're starting to see this with better webinars and groups like Longevity Docs, which are doing far more sort of education, with longevity doctors, and these are really, really important to keep communicating. And of course, we see a lot more conferences around the world really happening. And I think that more and more of those conferences really need to really look at those at the sharp end of delivering care to real people and really taking the sort of the things that we're finding out in the labs and how do you apply that in the real world context of real people. So there's a huge appetite for collaboration, and again, are really important to spur on this sort of scientific research that we want to be seen at scale. And of course, this is where the Human Exposome Project is going to be looking to working with groups around the world, academic institutions, clinics, etc., the whole ecosystem of people who are operating in this space. So I think I know we're sort of probably coming up to the time when really we need a bit of time for questions and answers. So there we go. And I will stop there and open up to the floor, and you will tell me what questions you have for me, and I will hopefully be able to answer them.
Thank you so much, Tina. I just love hearing you speak about this because it's so much inspiration and everything coming from seeing the real change being implemented rather than just in the lab over one probe. So I will use my host privileges to ask my questions first. Sure. Very selfishly. And actually, both of them concern data, because you talked a little bit more about this concern that people want their data to be anonymized and to, first of all, make sure that they make no harm. And you, back on the very first slides with the Wilczok project in Washington, you mentioned that the concept of donating the data. And could you speak a little bit more about this? Like, for example, myself as Dominika, I have my sleep data, I can have my blood work. What kind of data would I donate, and what will I have in return?
So this is a really interesting question, because of course there's a lot of groups looking at for example, how do you incentivize people to share their data? Now, some of it might come through monetary incentives. You know, that is one model. And of course, we've got all the developments with crypto and all the rest of it, and secured contracts and all those sorts of things, which will enable that sort of thing to be done in a way that is safe, is secure, etc. But I think there's some other models that are really, really interesting. And it comes back down to some of the work that I'm doing in the UK context. And now in the UK, and in comparison to things that are happening around the world. So for example, we have places in the world like in India, for example, where they're very, very advanced with their investment in digital infrastructure. You know, they are giving health ideas at the moment to their over plus billion citizens they have as a country, and of course they see the opportunity to link and share data sets with secure IDs, in a way that will open up the possibility for research at scale that has never before been able to be done. And I think the sort of stuff that the UK are looking at, for example, where is how do you unlock and open up those data silos? Because we have a massive issue, as indeed in many other countries in the world. I mean, you only have to look to the US to see this, where we have data that is locked in data silos because of the business models that we have, which are there to protect data for commercial gain, right? So in the UK environment, for example, what we're looking at, and there's some legislation that's going through at the moment, how do we create this sort of smart data economy where we can harness data at scale, but give the control to the consumer, the citizen, through the use of, for example, personal data wallets, so that you can actually let the citizen decide how they consent to the use of their data and how they share their data with third-party providers. That is a way that is very secure, very easy to do, through consent mechanisms that are built, through, personal data wallets, for example, is one mechanism to do that, where you can actually ask, now you can incentivize that through all sorts of different incentives. You can incentivize it not necessarily just by money, or it could be sort of other reward tokens or other sorts of incentives that could be offered by, by brands, by companies. But you could also ask the consumer, listen, do you want to share your data for the purpose of scientific research? And you can actually, because I think a lot of the work that we've been seeing is that people are quite, and we know that people will share their data quite readily if they have a benefit from that data. This is what's happening in the big tech model. We share our data all the time, but we don't even think about it because we are getting the benefit of products and services that are offered. But I think another model, which I think is really interesting, and it comes down to another model where, because the control of the data is given to the consumer, to the citizen, through the use of these secure, data wallets, you're giving them the control to share their data for the purposes of, for example, scientific research. So these are the sorts of models that you can look to. And then, of course, with secure IDs and the way to link up data sets, this is what opens up the possibility to do research and scale. So to your point about the type of data, I mean, the type of data that would be useful, yes, of course, wearable data, your Oura ring, your sleep data, your supermarket data. What are you buying in the shops? Are you, do you buy a lot of junk food? There's an enormous amount of data that is existent in all sorts of different sources of information that we can harness and use at scale. So not only at an individual level and be given access to products and services that may benefit you individually, but actually at an aggregated level would do a huge amount to understand what is actually really driving health at a population health level that, of course, policymakers, might really be interested in, because that will then shed a light. Where do they need to invest their money rather than in hospitals all the time, for example? How do we invest it into, for example, better housing, where we can develop housing that actually supports better air quality, that takes out mold from the air, that keeps people healthy? So it's kind of like, it's really, getting those insights that will really shed light on how you can actually invest in health more in terms of prevention rather than wait too long when people actually start to fall ill. So I think there's and so of course, the UK are looking at this. There's some legislation going through. How do we create a smart data economy where we can harness data, at scale, which will really fuel the development of next generation products and services, making money for businesses, but also opening up the possibility for people to decide for themselves how they want to share, potentially monetize, but also share for research, So these are all the sorts of things that I think are really, really exciting opportunities to break down the silos, bring data together at scale, being able to link the data in a secure, privacy-preserving way. And of course, we have the technologies, the cyber technologies. These are all the technologies that certainly, the UK are looking at intensely at the moment. And of course, other countries around the world are experimenting with as well.
Right. I never heard of the idea of the data wallets before, but I think it's really a powerful move, and it could even solve some demographic social problems if implemented correctly. So I will be definitely looking into that. But you made me wonder about one more thing, and that is, we all in the webinar here are knowing a little bit about longevity. At least we know about health and everything, but the wearables and everything is just now available to everyone, even without any basic health knowledge, not to mention longevity. And this is more on the psychological research. You mentioned yourself that psychosocial stress is one of the biggest contributors to exposome. And the negative effects are positive too, but mostly negative in the context. And I wonder, should people be actually maybe allowed is not the word, but should people have all the access to their sleep data, let's say constant blood works and everything? Because I even have example in my own life where a very friendly professor to mine, professor in molecular biology, everything, very high level scientist, still getting so psychologically stressed about the quality of their sleep and all the data that are not so positive. And to be honest, it's driving more stress and negativity than positive effect. What do you think about this?
So that's a really, really good point. And I think, there's the hyper quantified self that is responsible for driving some of this anxiety. And I completely, so I think part of it is, so I think there is a worry about that for certain types of individuals, absolutely. And I think part of that anxiety is also about making sure that you have the tools and the solutions to be able to address whatever is being uncovered about your sleep patterns or whatever. And I think there are certain things that you can do and can actually take control of yourself, but there are certain things that you can't. Like, for example, if you're not sleeping properly because you have financial worries, or you're going through a breakup, or you're worried about a family member being ill, or those sorts of factors, it's much more difficult to be able to solve those problems for yourself. So I think that's an element, and I think there's also I think too much information can be bad for you, and I think that's also an area that I think personally we have to actually decide for ourselves, what is good and bad information in terms of how we react to things. So I think it's an important point. I think we live in an information intensive society. And I think, and this is where I think the coaching element and the behavioral coaching, and I think this is where this whole concept of psychological coaching, health coaching, which of course is a lot of the stuff that the longevity clinics are really bringing into hand-holding and coaching people through their health journey, so that you're not left on your own, so that you can actually get support, so that you can actually be able to make sense of all this information and coach you on a successful health journey. So these are the sorts of things that I know a lot of longevity clinics are offering. In fact, you will, if you speak to most longevity clinics, they will say that actually understanding the psychological makeup of that person, where they're at psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, this is actually the most important part of it, because you're right. If you have too much information, you don't know how to deal with it, that actually could be potentially damaging. So that is very much in the current thinking of the services that are provided, and the good clinics are providing. Not all the clinics are providing this. So this is what I call the next frontier, to really understand, that piece around what information you can cope with and what you can do about it, because there's nothing worse than if you've got a lot of information when you can't actually do something about it, or you feel ill-equipped to be able to do something about it.
That's true. The feeling prepared and equipped on tackling the challenges, that's actually a huge thing that we should be doing more for. So not just certifying the physicians and activists, but maybe also people, like education to the people, something. Maybe it should be longevity as a school subject. Like there's just so many
Absolutely
things to talk about. There's one question in the Q&A box talking about the insurance companies. Do you know if there's any interest? Because I for sure heard that there were some insurance companies that were like, motivating people that their insurance will be cheaper if they like have more steps per day or something. But do you know if any of them are like doing it specifically within the Exposome framework?
So, I mean, it depends. So, yes and no. So, I think it needs to be much more sophisticated. But I think the insurance industry has a huge amount to gain from really engaging in all the stuff that we've been talking about on this call. I think they're a little bit behind. Just that they tend to be quite a conservative sort of industry. But having said that, I think what we've been seeing over the past few years is some real interest and some real movement in this space. So, for example, Vitality Health, some of you may have heard of. So, of course, they incentivize, their customers through adopting, a Fitbit tracker, wearables into their lifestyle and actually getting enough steps a day. Now, physical activity is very much linked to Exposome. The physical activity levels, how much you move, and of course, there's quite a lot of research that even walking for as little as 20 minutes a day will have a huge impact on your individual health. But if everyone did 20 minutes of walking a day, it would have a massive health, but also wealth impact on society. And that simple act of walking, that amount, will make a huge difference. So if you can incentivize that walking, and if you walk, and it doesn't even need to be 10,000 steps a day, because Vitality Health, they came out with some recent research on habits and how you can encourage people to develop the right habits. And they're very, very focused on activity. They even said that between sort of 7,000 to 8,000 steps a day was actually had drove most of the impact that they could see with the research that they conducted. You didn't even need to do 10,000 steps a day. So, but it had a massive impact, and they did some calculations in terms of how much, for example, in the UK would save, our public healthcare system by incentivizing people to walk. So that is a classic area of Exposome, getting people to walk. Now, there's another area which is obvious, which is nutrition. Now, of course, we've got apps like this, the Zoe app. And again, this is, it looks at your microbiome, and it really sort of looks at, how you metabolize. And of course, that whole area, if you were to incentivize people through healthier eating, for example, and again, if you link that up with, and again, there are some really interesting startups in this space which are accessing, for example, so your club card data off of what you purchase in supermarkets, and it can analyze, the sorts of foods that you're buying. Are you eating too much ultra high processed food, which is a massive driver of the obesity epidemic? And how do you incentivize healthy eating options? And you can have discounts on your purchases by actually purchasing healthier foods, for example. And again, that's the sort of stuff that you could actually incentivize in terms of this new smart economy through personal data wallets and things like that. So these are all, and of course you could get insurance companies involved in that whole dialogue. So I think insurance companies have a lot to gain by reducing the claims through ill health, visiting hospitals and all the expensive treatments that you need if you're ill, by incentivizing positive health behaviors. So Vitality Health, there are many other, kind of really interesting startups like ULife, for example, that's a kind of a new next generation insurance product called ULife, YULI, life. Really interesting. And again, they're incentivizing that sort of positive behavior. So I think, and I know I've been speaking to quite a lot of the insurance industry in the UK context, and of course, many of these are global operators. They can see the opportunity, absolutely. And of course, with AI and real-time data feeds and all the rest of it, they can get much more accurate information on health risks, which of course will benefit, the development of their products and services, and again, will be part of their next generation offering.
Right, thank you. And the last final question that is still, we have 2 minutes, so let's use them, even though it might be not enough for such a complex question. One person asked, quote, any suggestions for a developing country to develop longevity clinics and interventions? And this, I think we can extrapolate to a little bit of a broader question. Of course, we can talk about sharing the data and even like obtaining the data in UK, US, European Union countries. But what is the role of the countries that are like, struggling with their own, let's say, developing or underdeveloping problems right now? Can we include them inside of this research?
Absolutely. So absolutely, we should, and we should include them for a start, because I see, and I think, as a humanitarian, from a social perspective, and from an ethical perspective, we must make sure that the benefits of all this research that we now have with the longevity aging research and all the technologies, we must make sure that as many people around the world can benefit from this. But I would say, and this is where looking to experiences, for example, in the fintech world, apps like M-Pesa in Kenya and places in Africa, for example, having access to these apps on people's phones. And let's remember that more and more people have access to, these to smartphones. That actually made a huge difference to people getting access to banks, to things that made a huge difference to their lives. And why shouldn't we impart the same experience, the same learnings from that into the health realm, because it's all connected anyway. So I think, look, and if you look to, for example, what India are looking to do, they want to open up access to, giving health IDs to all their citizens. And obviously it's a huge country. And they want to see, and they could already see that the benefits of the so-called longevity dividend is actually going to start running out in about 10 years' time, because their population is also aging. And what they don't want, which is what the westernized countries have been hit with, is that sort of the huge impact on healthcare costs as they get an aging population. So what they're trying to do is all the things that we're talking about here, is to be able to get better data, to understand health from billions of people, to really start to then design the interventions and the solutions to keep them healthy and well for longer, to reduce the impact of healthcare costs, that could be projected coming online as their population ages. So I think, let's remember that you can get a lot of data on very simple technologies now, which are becoming much more accessible around the world, including in the developed world. And my final point is this: it is absolutely imperative that the longevity community has access to this data from a data diversity perspective, because we don't have enough data from the continent of Africa, from India, from all the the developing nations around the world, and we need that data to get much more accurate information on human health. So it's in everyone's interest. And so I think, this is the sort of stuff that I hope the Human Exposome Moonshot Forum will be looking at. How do we democratize access to all the benefits of this science to make a difference to as many lives as possible? Because that is something that we all should be striving to do, because it will only make, it'll make all of us richer in the end if we can, and of course will feed into this huge issue that we have with planetary health, climate change. We have to, it's a much bigger thing that we're actually looking at. So I think hopefully everyone will realize the opportunities to kind of really see this at scale, involving as many nations as possible, rich and less rich nations.
Hopefully we and the actionable people will not only realize that, but actually take steps towards it, rather than going after another short-term high financial goal. So yes, there are hopes, and I can't wait for the Exposome Moonshot findings. And is it going to be transmitted online, like by any chance, or?
So if you Google Exposome Moonshot, you'll find it, and actually you can all register to get involved. There's a form there. So just get involved, because it will need everyone, and it needs to involve as many groups, as many individuals as possible, in this huge, giant scientific endeavor. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at the website, get involved. If it's not in the actual meeting in May, there are going to be opportunities down the line to get involved, through your organization or whatever it might be. So, and these are all the things that we'll be obviously looking at in terms of the roadmap and how to do this, how to pull this off at scale worldwide.
Yeah, that's truly
amazing. This is
absolutely
beautiful.
Dominika, you see that we have more questions in the Q&A box.
Well, no, we have more questions, but we are unfortunately out of time already, over time. So I took the screenshot of the questions, and we will be consulting on them and sharing it in our either next post or next newsletter. So thank you so much, Tina, again, for dedicating your time to us. I really appreciate it. I learned so much, and I'm sure our audience did as well. So we will be sharing this was recorded after approving with you. We will be sharing that with our further audience. Thank you so much again. And
thank you.
Well, to the Exposome Moonshot.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.